You're now live.
You're now live, and Clay is here, the commissioner is here. And Commissioner, we've been asked to make recommendations if we have some broadband projects that should be put on the fast track CRF can't wait for the budget bill. These would be time sensitive. And it's my understanding there's 3.2 million in CRF funds that didn't get spent and didn't get reverted, that are still sitting somewhere in your office. And there's other CRF funds that have been taken back if we have more than that. So
How much money?
3.2 that we know of.
I thought it was 3.8 when it was reported to us in late December.
That's what I was told by appropriations. I think we may have made that they true these things up all the time. We did a few last minute things in December, and that true up may have changed. But the latest I had was 3.2.
Okay, so if it was 3.8 in December, do we have an accounting of the difference?
I don't know.
Has something gone out without our approval, or
No,
how do we
no.
account for that different number?
I think it's just truing up. I'll look to the commissioner.
Okay, good.
We actually have three different numbers, and this is where
Okay.
angels fear to tread. My department was doing some work with Steve Klein earlier this year, and we sent over him a detailed spreadsheet of the state of play as of the date of that submission. I'm trying to find it here for you. This is as of January 18, and if you recall, Madam Chair, I came into the legislature with a concern about a sunset provision, and was persuaded that the thing to do was to wait for the legislature to act on that sunset provision. And so I treated that as a standstill. Nothing gets spent, not another dime goes anywhere, nothing gets obligated until we know what the state is regarding that sunset provision. So on January 18, as we were trying to get to a common number with Steve Klein in the Joint Fiscal Office, the department developed a spreadsheet. The number on that sheet, if I am reading it correctly, and Clay, I would ask you to correct me if I'm wrong, the number on our spreadsheet was 3.6 million. And the advice from Steve was, as we're dealing with these numbers, be consistent with your numbers, meaning stick with your numbers. And so I am offering that to you, and to Senator McDonald's point, we have a very clear accounting of what that 3.6 million represents. And that has been forwarded to the Joint Fiscal Office. Clay, would you add anything to that?
No, I mean, I think that's accurate. I think that's where perhaps the committee is getting its numbers. But in addition to the information we provided to Steve Klein, the budget adjustment bill has also appropriated, I think, 275 or 300,000 to the temporary broadband subsidy program, which has reduced that number by a further amount, which I think is how you get to, it's either 3.2 or 3.3.
That sounds like it explains, Madam Chair, the mystery of why you have a different number in mind. I think for purposes of today's discussion, it would probably make the most sense to simply go with your number. But I just
got
wanted to be
that from
clear.
Senator Kitchell this week, and only Senator Kitchell understands the inner mysteries of the BAA.
Understood.
Madam Chair, I regret that I asked the question because it's mouse meat. We have much bigger fish to fry here. Let's
do.
get through this.
Okay, so that, on that note, let's get moving. Commissioner, I know you were coming in, there are proposals in the budget for one-time money. There is, so we are not limited. There is one-time money floating around out there. To what we can do, I think the question is, this is another quick moving CRF bill. What do we have that's time sensitive? And so maybe if you or Clay could walk us through what the proposals are, and then maybe the committee has other ways they think we could spend the money, and we can have that discussion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So there is a distinction between the work that we began last year with CRF money that this committee and House Energy Technology were very intimately involved in crafting in Act 137 and Act 154. I'm going to call those the CRF programs. And then there is the one-time appropriation that the governor has proposed in his budget, the $20 million for connectivity. And I think we should, for clarity's sake, just call that the $20 million spend. There is some overlap between the CRF programs and the $20 million spend, simply because I've been trying to get all targets. But my rationale is this: good programs were stood up in the CRF space. We had to stop some of that, in my opinion, unfortunately prematurely, because of the old cliff that went away with the December 27 stimulus bill from DC, but nobody could know that at the time. That had a major impact, though, on several of the CRF programs we were running. And so there are balances for those programs that have stood still. I protected those from reversion as best as I could, because my read of the landscape in the legislature and in the administration was, all things being equal, people felt that the dollars appropriated for connectivity should continue, that work remains unfinished and should be finished if it can be. As you know, the constraints, in addition to the December 30 deadline that now no longer exists, were the other Treasury parameters about you can only spend this on telemed, telehealth, teleworking, and the like. And I will assume we all remember roughly that there were a boatload of constraints, and connectivity was always a stretch, but we found good ways to stretch in Act 137 and Act 154. And so from my point of view, if you took the decision to simply continue that work and expend these balances to complete that work, that would be a good use of the money. As if you recall, last fall, we had quite a bit of discussion about poll data harvesting and the role that that could play to foster the work of the communications union districts and other planning purposes. That work, unfortunately, I think some of it got done in a small way, because for details that we don't need to go into right now. The bottom line is the big project that everybody was very excited about at the end of the day could not be done and was not done. And so my thought was some of that one-time money, the $20 million spend, could productively be spent on that. If you were to authorize resumption of the CRF programs, in all likelihood, some of that money would be spent by the CUDs individually to do poll data harvesting. However, if you were to proceed under the $20 million spend instead, it would have the advantage of removing any question about whether poll data harvesting qualifies as a CRF activity. So there's a choice to be made there. We also had a program under the in the CRF space called LECAP, the Line Extension Consumer Assistance Program. That program was successful in what we did with it. We did not reach as many people as we might like to have, simply because the constraints of materials available in the market, line workers, and the ability of providers to step up and do that work or better said, commit to having it done within the constraints of the CARES Act, were limited. People behaved responsibly. And so the good news was many Vermonters got connections that way. The bad news was we have a list of people who would love to get those connections today, whom we have not been able to fund. And I would recommend that that be completed. The governor's $20 million spend contemplates spending money on that and continuing the program. It would have the benefit of not being subject to this new deadline of December 31, 2021. I see a hand up, Madam Chair.
Senator Brock has a question.
I'm sorry, Senator, you're muted.
You're muted, Randy. Randy, you're muted.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Regarding the various contracts that were awarded last year, several were not completed by December 31 due to the issues that you've raised, such as lack of materials or lack of labor. The Danville one comes to mind in particular. Are those projects going to be completed? And if so, what's the funding source for those projects, the continuation of projects that have already been awarded?
So those projects I would expect to have completed. They will be completed with CRF money. That is, Clay, please correct me if I'm wrong. That is what we are waiting on the sunset provision through the Budget Adjustment Act to be resolved. That's the only thing holding them up at this point that I'm aware of.
In other words, they are not involved at all in the $3+ million that was left over. That this is in effect old money.
Clay, can you answer that question?
Clay, you're muted.
Clay, you're muted.
The senator's correct. The 3.6 was unobligated, so we've deducted all obligated funds, including those awarded under the Connectivity Initiative.
Now, those that were awarded under the Connectivity Initiative, in the event that they are not completed, such as the Danville project, what happens? What happens if they have contracted to do the work, but have failed to get it done because of lack of materials or lack of labor or lack of whatever? If that work doesn't get done, what happens? What happens to the money? What happens vis-a-vis the award?
My understanding is that that is a premature question. Nobody has failed to do anything yet.
Well, if they do, it's a question that I would assume that you would have a plan for.
That's quite correct, Senator. I would want to look at the contract terms before I answer that question outright today.
Okay, if you could get back to us, we'd appreciate it.
Glad to do so.
Thank you.
There's also been a question, now that we're out of the emergency pandemic mode, about if one of these projects is completed and is then sold to another entity, perhaps a for-profit provider, does the state have any control over that? We have essentially built the lines. And then the other question is, with pole harvesting, who owns the data? Because it sounds like that's valuable information. Everybody has to have it to string anything on those poles. And have you done any thought on either of those?
On the first one, Madam Chair, since there are contracts in place, I would want to look at the contract to see what the terms are. And we're happy to get back to you on that. And Clay, I hope we're noting these questions so that we can be sure to get back to the committee.
But
let me just
okay.
With respect to the pole data harvesting, my memory is that that would have been the next level of thinking and drafting had that appropriation been made. And so the state of play on that remains what it was last fall, which is if the appropriation were to be made, that is something we would work on in the contract. Sitting here thinking about it as the potential counterparty, I would want to ensure that that's public data. or at least have an agreement about that so that the public has access to it, because that's the whole point, is for it to be a public resource for planning purposes. Whether I could then find a contractor who would be willing to do so, do this work on those terms, I don't know sitting here today. I'm assuming that's the case, but I don't know.
Okay.
One
Send
other
her-
thing, Madam Chair, you said at the outset of that comment that we're out of the pandemic emergency response mode, and very respectfully, that's not the reality my agency is living. So
Yeah, I understand that. I think
Yeah.
the legislature has got a little more, I mean, we were reacting and we
Yes.
now
yes,
can do a little more future. Our future was the next 3 weeks, I think,
Yeah.
a year ago. And now we can maybe look out a few months or a few years.
yes,
Um,
and that is
Have the luxury of,
yes, yeah,
yeah, a
and
little
that's
more
most
in depth.
welcome. Yes, I understand now where you're coming from.
Okay, Sandra Hardy.
Thank you. I have a new kid on the block question. I think I know the answer, but could someone, Clay or June, or I'm sorry, Commissioner, or someone give me a quick definition of poll data harvesting? And
Yes.
why is that beneficial? Who would, I mean, yeah, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Absolutely, and this may surprise you, but it's simply the truth. Vermont's grid is 100 and plus years in the making. Polls have gone up over the years in many different territories. Those territories are all exclusive to a particular electric utility, for instance. The predecessors and interest to Consolidated and Fairpoint, Verizon, Ma Bell, all those guys had polls in our state through many different generations. They all had different practices for how they maintained information about their polls. And in many instances, they maintained very little information about their polls. And the kind of information we're talking about is the condition of the poll, the height of the poll, its weight-bearing characteristics, its location, how many other attachments are on the poll, where it's precisely located, whether it has joint tenancy of ownership or is owned exclusively by one, whether there are agreements for sharing space on there, et cetera. So a lot of data like that, which can be captured now by means of roaming vehicles with cameras that can go out in the field and do that. You can also, as a person, go out there and do it. Very labor intensive and somewhat constraining when you're looking at weather. You know, it's like a day like today might be harder to collect poll data than say in August. So that in a nutshell is it. That data is very important for designing plans and designing engineering specs as well. And it's a huge cost saver for the CUDs if they're able to get that data, fresh data now, and obviously to do so without having to pay for it themselves. And there's a public interest in that. There are some, there are different utility practices as to how accessible that data is. If you recall, 85% of the state is GMP service territory at this point, and GMP tends to have more open access to that data than others. But I would say across the board, folks are pulling in the right direction. They just have different levels of openness for their particular reasons as system owners. And it's worth noting that while the electric companies and the telephone line companies are under regulatory jurisdiction, and the cable companies to some extent, others are not. So this is very much one of those tension moments where this desire to have a public body like a CUD enter into a competitive landscape reveals these kinds of issues that need to be worked through. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's really helpful because that is not what I thought you were talking about. So that is really helpful. I thought you were talking about getting data from like digital data about people
Yeah.
who were, that was traveling across the lines through the polls. So that's actually
Understood.
less freaky than I thought. It's literally data about the physical characteristics of the polls themselves.
Yes,
It
if you
sounds
like,
it's
Senator, I can send you something that I sent around to other legislators last fall that really gives you a pictorial idea of what we're talking about.
Yeah, that would be great. I'd love to have that. It sounds like an
Okay.
army of high school and college students could collect that data. There are a
We
lot.
actually have two gentlemen that have started a company to do that. And it was last fall that we heard there was this thing that looks like the Google bug that can drive around and take high resolution pictures and get that same amount of data that previously took a couple guys in boots to hike out through my backyard, which is where the poles are on this street. But if you're going to string any lines, you have to know, to budget it, and to do your engineering, because if there's too many lines on the pole, then you have to replace the pole with a taller pole, and you have to get everybody who owns other lines to move all their lines. So this is just it's very valuable data. And so that's why the question of who owns it and who's controls it. And right now, it's all over the place, and trying to figure that out can take a lot of time for new folks, which in this case are the CUDs, to figure out and map out. And stringing the actual fiber is the easy part.
Sounds like you have a second career in this, Senator Cummings. And you've really perfectly rounded out the description of what we're talking about. There's also another issue that's about keeping the data fresh. And so it's one thing to collect it, but it's ever changing. It can change when somebody has an accident and knocks a pole down. It can change when a utility does some upgrading of their lines and their poles and the like. So once you've created the data, it's very valuable for a period of time, and then it degrades over time. And there are issues about who's going to be responsible to maintain it. Can you contract for that? Is that what we're trying to do right now? So in answer to your first question, Senator Cummings, our thinking on pole data harvesting has not progressed beyond what it was in last fall. The proposal in the budget is to revive it, and the advantage of using the $20 million is that it affords us some time to do precisely this kind of reflection. So that's the state of play. The other thing is to Senator Hardy's point, why are we doing this? The maximum utility of this data is not an immediate pandemic emergency. It has applications in it if you're trying to build in the pandemic, but its optimal use is for long range project planning, even if those projects are 18 months, 2 years out. And that was clearly beyond the scope of the December 30 deadline. And increasingly this year, we need to get moving if we're going to use CRF money for this, because we're now rounding the corner to the end of the first quarter of this year.
So, Senator Bray.
I have a sense I'm going to be on Jeopardy, and the bonus category is going to be pole data harvesting. So I want to ask one more question here. So I can go for broke. When you do this, you have to get, I noticed that the poles around here have tags on them, like serial numbers. Do you have to collect that? And do you also get precise GPS coordinates when you're out there?
So the way I'm looking at it from my vantage point, I wish in retrospect everybody had collected those numbers. There are probably some people who would say, no, you don't need that. What you need is the location of the guide wires, et cetera. And others would be more visionary and would say, as safe side caution, do it. It would seem to me that that is information you want, and that's exactly what that Google Eye would pick up. And it's hard for me to imagine that you wouldn't record those tags, because that's your easiest way to go to the utility and to say, I am very interested in this pole. And that is the best opportunity you have, best chance you have of the utility being able to locate the pole in its records and tell you what its condition is, if that answers your question. And I should add too that I actually don't like the term pole data harvesting. It sounds very artificial to me, but you're literally going out there and harvesting data that is on the pole, and that includes those shields. To me, it's more akin to inventorying, but whatever.
Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner, it might be most helpful if you or Clay walked us through the entire set of proposals that the governor has made. And
Yeah.
then where are the unfinished projects? What's it going to take to get them finished? And then a lot of this is time sensitive. I looked at two and I was thinking of the 3 million. One was the line extensions and the other was the pole harvesting. But I'm not at all clear if that can be done now, given that some sections of the state have quite a few feet of snow. And if it can wait until March or April, it probably should go through the regular
Yes, I see what you're saying,
slow
Madam Chair.
process. I mean,
Yeah.
this is supposed to be thinking of the emergency, get it out quickly is what I'm understanding, because we do have some CRF funds that are left over. There were a proposal for some business grants in the governor's BAA, which were not included, but we all know that businesses can use all the help they can get, but they wanted to take a little extra time to think it through. So help us understand
Yes.
what is out there or what's been proposed and the kinds of time sensitivity.
So here's how I would recommend the committee think of this. Your good work of last year was interrupted by a false deadline that has gone away. If you wanted to commit these dollars to finishing that work, we need to get going on that. You may not be able to go out in the field right now and do everything that you would do for pole data harvesting, but if you've got that settled, you have the money, the contracts have been worked out and the like, then you're ready to go as soon as the weather does permit, would be my view. And if you need more certainty on that, we can get back to you on that, or you might consider having one of the CUDs in who are very interested in this, such as EC Fiber, to get their take on how time sensitive this is.
On the pole harvesting, but
pole
can
data
you get
harvesting.
us a list of the projects? Because we authorized some payments back in January for projects that had been delayed because they couldn't get.
Yeah, that's yet different. Now you're talking about connectivity initiative projects, which were extensions of systems, not line extensions, but.
Right, okay, so all right, and.
That's yet
but
different.
You said there were projects that were not finished that could be, those are not.
The pole data harvesting is not one of those projects.
No,
But
I thought that Danville was mentioned that they weren't finished.
Danville is one of the connectivity initiative projects.
Okay.
And that's one of the kind of projects we're waiting to make sure that we have the spending authority, that the sunset didn't disturb anything, and that that everybody is comfortable with our proceeding, because that was that was why I came to you folks in January.
Right. So that
because
money is there. It's
that
not
money
in
is
the
part of the
3 point.
16, yeah, that's not part of the
Okay.
2 million.
It's allocated, Madam Chair, but it's not being spent yet. Is that what the
That's
status
correct.
is?
That's correct, Senator McDonald.
So if Senator Cummings' question was answered on what do we do if someone builds a build out like that particular one, and then turns around as soon as it's built and sells it to someone else,
That was a question.
Do we
that
have
was a-
time,
yeah.
since it hasn't started yet, to make some contingency plans to prohibit a move?
That
I
was
think-
the question that Senator Cummings asked earlier, and I'd said we would go look at the contracts and get back to you on that.
And if it is not in this contract, we need to talk about it for future contracts. But
Well-
what do we think should happen? We're learning as we go here. This is new and uncharted territory. I know we built things into contracts that came out of our experience over our last connectivity initiative with federal money.
Certainly, Madam Chair, it was new and uncharted territory when we made the decisions we made in September. And I'm sure that I believe that the question that we are probably about to ask ourselves after we've dealt with some of these leftovers, but to ask ourselves immediately is what would we do if a month from now, $100 million, $50 million showed up and we were able to use that? What would we need to do now to be ready for that, so we don't say, oh my goodness, it's now late April, we just got a whole bunch of money and how would we spend it? We need to ask those questions now.
That's what we're doing.
Okay,
Okay.
Oh, perhaps, Madam Chair,
Sandra Bray has a question.
yes.
Well, I can, if the commissioner has something more to add, I'll wait, and then I have a question. So go ahead, please.
Okay.
This is your call, Madam Chair. What I was going to do was simply run down the list of the work that you folks authorized last summer so that you have in mind which ones are time sensitive, which ones are not, and then talk about the 20 million spent. So I don't know how Senator Bray's question would interface with that, but I want to get you that overview picture so that you get an answer to your question.
Sandra Bray, why don't you?
Sure. Well, it's really an overview question. I, like probably everyone in this room, has gotten plenty of emails about where are we, what's coming. And so the question I've gotten a couple of times lately we're always trying to distill it down from 1,000 details to a big picture. And the question is, under the current administration proposal, just trying to understand what percentage of unserved households we have now and where you think we'll be in 2 years.
So that's a very good question. And I'm going to ask Clay to keep me honest on the numbers, but in rough numbers, before the pandemic, we had 70,000 addresses in Vermont, give or take, that were not served or that were underserved. If your threshold for underserved is having less than 25.3 access to 25.3 broadband, and unserved is if you had less than 4.1. Through the pandemic, we have been able to reach or provide access to broadband, which is not the same as actually connecting individuals. We've brought that number down by roughly 10,000, give or take. I would look to Clay to give you a more precise number. At the same time, while we were doing that work with the CRF money, the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund results were announced. And those results, that's federal money coming from the FCC to bidders who have agreed to provide 25.3 or better, to
Oh, so
the
we-
addresses in their bids. And
Senator
that money-
McDonald is having
Well,
apoplexy.
the
Um,
commissioner just said 25.3, so.
I said 25.3 or better, Senator.
Okay,
that,
so-
that is
okay.
the federal standard, Senator.
That's
for
correct. And what we need to decide here in Vermont is what standard we are going to apply to the extent that we have the authority to apply a standard
Yes,
before we get caught in the situation once again where we haven't spelled it out clearly. So we only have 25.3 to deal with. Are we going to go with the goals? Are we going to go with the VETA requirements? Or are we once again going to find ourselves buying soon to be obsolescent stuff only because we have not prepared for the next thing? We may
did
choose to
have
do
this
the cheap stuff
discussion
anyway, but we may choose to do the cheap stuff
extensively.
anyway, but it shouldn't because we haven't thought about it.
okay. This is the federal standard. All the commissioner is telling us is how many more households she's run that cable by. It has nothing to do with what the actual, how many houses actually hooked on, and it has nothing to do with the
Okay.
actual speed.
Okay.
This is the federal standard for broadband.
What's already been done, is that what we're hearing?
Yes, all we want to know is how, the question I believe was, how many households, addresses, buildings have we run the wire by? And we had the discussion last week. And I think EC Fiber is the only one that has answered the email we sent out afterwards saying, how many people have you hooked up?
Oh.
And under what terms? The other issue that's come up was brought up by Franklin Telephone, who strung up all kinds of fiber. And there are people who have been getting 4.1 still signed up for something like the 4.1 or 10.1, but it was a huge percentage still signed up for the very low speed internet. So I think we
It
can
was a
string
marketing
it.
problem. Yep. That was a marketing
Well,
problem.
or maybe it's a cost problem. I don't know. We need to know that.
That was excellent testimony from them.
Yes, it was. Senator Hardy.
Well, Senator,
Oh,
Can I-
you're not finished. Okay, I'm
well,
sorry.
I don't think we got to the punchline exactly. So we started with 70 and now that number's coming down. And I guess at the end of 2 years, I'm wondering if we're using the same metrics for under and unserved and underserved. If you're using that same benchmark 2 years out, and 70 is reduced to what number? I'm just trying to get this basic thing straight before we go off into the permutations mode.
Fair enough. So to give you assurance, the department does use a consistent methodology for tracking this information, and it has an annual data gathering process it does using a consistent methodology. Using that methodology, we've come down in rough numbers from 70,000 to 47,000. And that was a combination of the CRF money and the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund auction results. The caveat I'm trying to give you is that the RDOF results are commitments to fund solutions for however many addresses were covered by the auction. Those are not actual, connections or lines that have been strung. It's rather what we call a funded solution. And those funded solutions, the bidders are obliged to deliver within a certain period of time. My memory is that is within the next 10 years. It would happen sooner, but it's a window of time in which they complete these builds.
Sure.
So for planning purposes, which is largely what we do, 47,000 would be the new number if you accept the RDOF addresses. To your point then about what this looks like 2 years from now,
Right.
it'll be, depending on whether you're talking about funded solutions or actual builds, that answer will be different. And I'm not in a position to answer that right now. I would be guessing. But if you're asking me to guess,
Mhm. Yes, please. I mean, I'm just trying to have a ballpark sense.
yeah, I'm going to punt to Clay because he has been running on the grounds the connectivity initiative and can tell you in rough terms how many addresses have been afforded access in a given year over the last couple of years. And that's assuming that we're not doing the $20 million spend, and that's assuming that there isn't some big federal money coming into the picture. This is giving you a feel based on what Vermont has been doing to date with the connectivity initiative. Go ahead, Clay.
Yeah, and thank you. In the past, the connectivity initiative has done, ballpark 500 to 1,000 addresses a year, sometimes less than 500, because we're giving grants for hundreds of thousands of dollars, not the 12 million that we did this time. So this is the CRF connectivity initiative round was significant increase over prior years.
Okay. All right, great. So with no sort of extraordinary funding, we're clipping along at 500 to 1,000 addresses a year. And we're all hoping to pick up the pace. And the question is figuring out the cost and the best way to make that investment. Got it. Thank you.
Pleasure.
And we have a commitment sometime in the next 10 years to do, I assume these mostly your internet provider companies, or
Clay-
with CUDs in on that
The
auction?
winners, Consolidated is the largest winner. Most of the companies are doing fiber to the home, except for Starlink, who's a satellite provider.
Okay. Maybe if we could get a summary of those, that would be helpful. We'll know.
Sure.
10 years seems like forever at this point, but
Clay, I hope I didn't overstate that. That's my memory of the terms of the RDOF, but do you know something
Phase
different?
one has to be, so we're in phase one of RDOF. It's split into two sections. And phase one has to be built within the next 6 years. So we anticipate that these projects should be done by 2026. And then phase two will cover the remainder of the state. So anything that's in, quote, contaminated census block today will be handled in phase two after the FCC fixes its mapping.
And then for the benefit of the committee, we will get you the information about the RDOF awards. It's available on our website, if memory serves. We put that up there. And I think we also have a map up there that shows you where the awards were made. But we'll get you those documents. So shall I continue, Madam Chair?
yes.
Okay. Let me retrieve my screen here. I think you've been asking about time-sensitive things, and so things that you have done with CRF money that are time-sensitive, if you're thinking about the end of the year deadline, would be the line extension program that we had. It would be the Lifeline subsidy, which we should talk about whether that needs to continue on its terms, because new money has come available, at least for low-income folks, through rental assistance. That's very new money. I think the department's getting $10 million to administer.
That's the phone
But
lifeline.
forgive me, I'm making a mistake here. I've got my apples and oranges mixed up. That will not help us with Lifeline, but there is different money that has gone to the FCC, I think 3.2 billion, to be dispersed nationwide to deal with Lifeline subsidies, but that will be income sensitive, whereas the program you folks authorized last year was not income sensitive, as I recall.
And this is phone lifeline,
This is broadband Lifeline.
broadband lifeline.
Yeah, because
Okay.
as you've pointed out more than once, there are issues here, and the emergency planning work that the department was commissioned to do They really did a nice job of highlighting the affordability concerns that are coming into view. We keep thinking that the big issue is people don't have access to broadband, meaning physical access, and that is a huge issue. But there's another one, which is great, the line's passing your house, but you can't afford to take service. And what can we do about that? And then there's another issue that Senator Brock has been in touch with me about, which is what do you do when somebody can't afford the gear necessarily, which is slightly different from not being able to afford the subscription. So anyway, if you wanted to do some next generation thinking about how to use CRF money, again, this is emergency broadband, and you could gainfully spend money on subsidizing closing those connections. I think very late in the game, it became clear to the committee that arguably wireless broadband would qualify for line extensions as well. We think of line extensions as, you know, stringing that line from the road to the house, but in the wireless context, it can mean mounting an antenna outside your house, and those antennas can be costly. And as a matter of reasoning, it's hard to see why a wireless connection would not qualify for some kind of help with line extensions, and that's how Act 137 was written last year. But we didn't have any wireless providers take us up on the line extension program. There were also smaller items that you folks funded with CRF money. A lot of it was the CUD, Community Resiliency Planning, and this is the one I've really been wanting to get to you, Senator Cummings, because you're asking about time sensitivity. There came a point in November where the Joint Fiscal Committee authorized moving funds that had been appropriated to the communication union districts for planning purposes under Section 14 of Act 137. The JFC authorized moving something in the neighborhood of 1.5 million, I think, into a different category where I think at least 2 CUDs would be able to actually build infrastructure with those dollars. And then it turned out shortly after that JFC decision was taken that the CUDs could not complete that work within the parameters of time then existing. And so those projects were not undertaken. I don't know sitting here right today whether they could still be gotten back on the table, but that sounded to me like something that could be, that should be pursued with the CRF money, if they can be. So that's the overview. Did I leave anything out of what was done in the fall, Clay, that should be mentioned for purposes of this conversation before I turn to the governor's proposed spend? The $20 million question.
No.
No? Okay, good. So as you've correctly pointed out, Madam Chair, the governor does have a 20 million line item of one-time money in the budget. Very important to keep in mind that this is money that does not have any of the CRF constraints. So this is money that I have looked at as how best to use it for the long term, the things that can be done that could not be, even on a stretch basis, justified under the CRF money. And what we have is a white paper that I'm happy to send to the committee that outlines what the administration's proposal is to do with the $20 million. But in a nutshell, what I had outlined was patterning the creation of a fund administered within the department after the Clean Energy Development Fund model. It's been a very successful model for incubating renewable energy. And my idea was that a similar incubator could be stood up for deploying broadband infrastructure. And the idea was to create a board that is independent in its decision-making, meaning independent from the department, much as the CDF board is. There's an executive director who assists with all the work on that and also gives the board strategic and technical guidance supported by other staff. That executive director answers to the commissioner, but otherwise the board in terms of decision making functions independently. And that board would administer 3 pots of money basically. One pot would have been for a modified version of the line extension program that is designed to make those grants that were made to consumers go farther by encouraging them to aggregate as a team, if you will, on the theory that if a line is built in their neighborhood and they put together their respective grant dollars, that makes the line, their contribution to the line, more affordable than if each individual consumer applies for an extension. The second pot of money was for what I'm going to call planning and pre-construction support for CUDs and other entities that have similar characteristics, meaning they need access to pre-construction capital, to design plans and the like, to build connectivity. That would be fiber, 100 up, 100 down. Those folks, this is basically the pot of money out of which something like the pool data harvesting project would be paid for. And then the third pot is the big pot. It's about $16 million. And that's a revolving loan / grant program, which is what the CDF has been administering for the past 15 years very successfully. And that would provide capital that the borrowers could then leverage with other capital resources, lenders like Vita, for instance, to build connectivity projects. So that's the proposal in a nutshell. And as I think you're aware, the House Energy Technology has a countervailing proposal. They've had the benefit of the administration's thinking in the white paper. Some of those ideas or variations of them have been included in that bill, but we are quite far apart because they are dreaming bigger, if you will. They have a $36 million loan program that they're considering. Whether you were to go with the construct in the administration's white paper, which is unimaginatively called the BIDF, the Broadband Infrastructure Deployment Fund, or you were to go with the House Energy Technologies construct, which is the Vermont Community Broadband Authority, in my judgment, either one of those vehicles would need to be staffed up considerably, but you could scale it if sizable federal funding actually comes to the state to be used in getting us to universal coverage in the state. Does that help you further down the path?
I think it helps further down the path in where we're going. I don't think it's giving us anything to tell appropriations we need to have out the door in the next 2 or 3 weeks.
With the exception of the sunset work, the budget adjustment work, that I think is absolutely necessary because the state needs to stand behind its commitments.
Okay,
These are people waiting to get paid.
but the budget, that's already in budget adjustment.
Okay, so beyond that, we're at a crossroads here, and maybe that's why we're having some trouble getting to a conclusion. When the programs that we came up with last fall and last summer were developed, we did not know that there was one-time money to the tune of $200 million that was going to need to be appropriated. And so I practically laid my life down to ring fence this money from reversion so that it would be there to be spent on the purposes that you clearly wanted it spent on last year. But now there is this one-time money available. And so to some extent, I think the urgency to expend that 3.2 million on these CRF projects has abated a little, except you have to recall that all of those activities were stood up because we continued to deal with the emergency. The emergency hasn't gone away. And so that would dictate that you push this money out to finish the work that it was intended for. And the sooner we can get people going on that, the better. I would hate to wait until you think the next, the big budget's going to be resolved. I gather that would be in July. That would put us right back where we were last year in terms of the time squeeze, and that's not a good thing. So if you want to finish this work that you started last year, then I would recommend getting that 3.2 million out the door in its present form and let us complete that work.
The
If
work
you,
such as Danville that we started.
well, that is yet different. That gets taken care of with the sunset. You take care of the
June,
sunset.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry, Clay,
Can I
go ahead.
jump in? If I could just jump in, yeah, I think one area is LECAP that could be focused on, and that situation is where we told a lot of people, I'm sorry, we can't get your line extension done by December 30th, so you can't have one. And so there's an example of, we get emails from irate Vermonters every day saying, when are we getting this program back? I really want my line extension. And so that's, I think, an area where I certainly feel the urgency, simply because
Spend the 3.2 there.
we're getting phone calls every day. Yeah.
Okay.
Clay, do you recall, was that a $500,000 roughly to finish the list?
I don't remember exactly what it was to finish the list. I think we've taken a list of names. It's about 160 people. So doing math on the
Yeah,
fly,
okay.
that's 3,000 times 160. But we also have people who called us up after the program who didn't actually apply. So I think there's some unknown demand out there still for the program.
Yeah. So there's, yeah,
Hardy.
right, there's known and unknown demand, that's right.
Okay, Senator Hardy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I almost called you Madam President. I almost upgraded you.
That's good. I'll do.
Oh, that took me off track. Okay. Clay sent me this really great table. I'm looking at it like a few weeks ago that had people who had applied for the LECAP program who you weren't able to fund. And they were just like this one slice. Then, there was another slice beyond that had not even yet gotten to apply because you had to close off the deadline because you thought that it had to be all spent by the December 20th. So, I mean, just on this first little, chunk, it was $375,000 about that you could have used. And there's definitely another layer on that. And to your point about the angry emails, we all get them from people saying, I wanted to use this program, but it closed down so fast. Why can't I use it? Or, I just was trying to finish my application and I couldn't get it in time, whatever. Or there were questions and I got rejected, whatever. I think we should definitely put some money into this LECAP program and get those people as many lines extended as possible. And then the other urgent thing that I'm hearing, and Senator Bray and I have just gotten emails from them, is the CUDs, and to try to move them along in their process a little bit more. So if we have this $3.2 million that we've been given as a quote unquote given as a committee to make recommendations about, those would be my two priorities based on my knowledge of the landscape at this point. And then these broader, bigger, longer term questions that are all extremely important, we can continue to jostle around in this committee, but let's get some money out the door for these things.
For what?
Senator Sorokin and then Senator Brock. Michael, you're muted.
Sorry about that. So I agree with
Mm-hmm.
Senator Hardy. I think the purpose of this exercise is to look at the we have an unusual situation here. We have another vehicle between budget adjustment and the budget to get money out the door now that is time sensitive. I remember I asked Adam Gresham when he was in here, was there any problem when we looked at the $200 million in one time that the governor was proposing to get out the door in the budget in May, which may be effective in July, which may not be workable until September, that we couldn't advance some of that. And he said, absolutely not. You know, if you want to, in your wisdom, to suggest to move the money quicker, let's do it. So I think we're potentially looking at even more than the 3.2. We should be looking at the $20 million. Now, anything we move out sort of gets priority status over other competing needs in the budget. And that's not the normal way we do that. But I'm dealing with the same struggles in my committee as to what do we want to get out quickly. So we're looking at things like mortgage assistance, which has stopped dead in its track as of December. We put in through this committee like $250,000. I don't know if that was general fund or CARES money at this point to bridge the internet subsidy program from, I think that's still in the Budget Adjustment Act. That still hasn't passed, but that was to bridge the shutdown of the broadband subsidy program through March when the December 27th program will kick into effect. But we could use some of this money for supplementing the new federal program, which is means tested, to continue assistance to people who were above the, whatever the AMI is for the new federal program. We have a golden opportunity to do something here to help people and to continue to either continue programs or to start programs that need some lead time, whether it's stringing lines or something, so we don't have to wait until July. If we know we're going to do it anyhow in July, let's do part of it now. I think we should be focused on. That bill's gonna, when is that coming, Senator Cummings? Like, Senator Kitchell asked for suggestions by Tuesday. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that by Tuesday, but we should be focused on, doing some aggressive spending right now.
Okay, but I don't know that the money that's proposed for the budget is in play. I believe they're looking at the remainder of the CRF funds. I can double check that. I think I was told we had 3.2 million, and Commissioner Clay, how much do you think it would take to get will it take 3.2 million to do the line extensions?
I think that's more money than we could spend on line extensions before the
Okay.
end of the year. Clay, do you disagree with that?
I think this time we have the benefit of having the program parameters established, but we run up against the same timeline issue, and so it depends on how much lead time we have. Some of these projects that are waiting in the wings can be quite large, 20 homes, 25 homes built. So
I've got a couple of those.
Yeah, and neighbors did a good job of getting together and applying in groups. So the more lead time we can have on that money, the better. I would want at least 7 or 8 months to do what we already have in the hopper. So to speak.
No, I don't think anyone's talking about putting an end date on this. I think this is just, if we got it to you in 2 or 3 weeks, could you start putting it to use and do more than you could if we made you wait till July? If you're still running and people are still applying. And the other thing I remember being told is that some of the providers were not participating in this program. There are requirements on them.
We did have some providers that were limited in their ability to apply or to participate simply because of the deadline. One internet provider didn't participate at all, but his facility had been burned to the ground by arsonists.
Oh, that sounds
So-
like a reasonable excuse.
Yeah, and others had taken connectivity initiative money and some of our other projects, and at a certain point just became tapped out and couldn't further commit. I think there's going to be a little more bandwidth from providers this time, given that we're not quite in emergency mode anymore, and we'd have a little bit more time.
I think we found out we didn't have the personnel we thought we would have, and the supply chain is in a lot of things. There were difficulties that no one anticipated or starting out, so.
Well, Madam Chair, just to interject briefly, Senator Sirotkin made some very important points. I wouldn't roll the dice and put the whole 3.2 million on LECAP, which is what I thought you were asking earlier. But
I'm just asking for budgetary, how
Yep.
much of that
What-
3.2, and then,
we had an unexpended balance in that program of about 1.4 million. And my recommendation would be that you give us a shot at putting that on the street. The other piece is we did stand up a very good program for getting subsidies out. It's just that the take-up rate was surprisingly low. We're not able to, I don't think we can explain very well why, but it seemed like that program got ramped up and then it had to close down before we could finish it. There was a balance of about 1.4 million in that one as well. And as Senator Sirotkin has pointed out, the aid that's coming now for broadband subsidies is means tested. And there are still many Vermonters, I can't quantify it, but there are many Vermonters out there who are hurting, who could use that subscription help at least. And this is the means by which the state could make that available to them. So folks who
Okay.
can't qualify at poverty level could nonetheless qualify for this subsidy. And given how much people are using the internet during the emergency and the things we're learning about the issue around affordability in the state, how big that problem is, I think that would be it would be judicious to use that money for its intended purpose. That brings you to about 2.8 million. I do feel I should make you aware that there's leadership within the CUD community that is very much hoping that the department would have the flexibility to take some of those pots of money that I just cited to you, line extensions and subsidies, and redirect it to work that they would like to see funding for. That would be new. And I don't have an opinion at this point about that. There are only so many hurdles we can scale at one time. But if you had interest in that direction, then I would highly recommend you hear from the CUDs on that to see what it is that they would like to do. Or perhaps there are colleagues of yours on House Energy Technology who could help you come up to speed on that very quickly. But that is something that I've heard mentioned to me about, gee, wouldn't it be nice if we could take some of that $3.2 million and move it over into what I'm going to call Section 14 programs, which were essentially helping CUDs.
okay. Senator Sirotkin.
So I just wanted to comment on your question, Madam Chair, about you're not sure whether the $20 million or the $200 million is in play. I think what's in play is what we say is in play. Adam Gresham said that $200 million, if we found it appropriate to start spending it sooner, that wouldn't be a problem. It's one-time money. They have an idea for it in July. We may have different ideas and we may want to spend it sooner if it's appropriate. It almost like money sitting in the bank, though I understand there may be some cash flow issues here. But the administration is not shy on pushing, trying to get that money out the door on questions, on issues that they like, for instance, the $10 million in further economic recovery grants. I don't understand why we need to be shy on areas of broadband. And while I appreciate that this is sort of an evolving topic, in this committee, I'm seeing really good body language from the commissioner, but I'm not hearing a really solid proposal on spending what they want to see spent right now with, I'm starting to hear more about the 3.2, but is there anything within the $20 million that they can see beneficial to get out the door on this other vehicle that's coming our way? I mean, that's the way the legislature generally works. The administration proposes and the legislature disposes, but I'm feeling like we're being left in this context to go chase down other witnesses, come up with ideas. I'm not hearing with clarity what you think we should do with this 20 million. Just leave it there for July? Or is there some stuff that could be spent now that we have an opportunity to spend that would work better for the citizens of Vermont?
Well, I really appreciate that, Senator. That's very helpful feedback from you on what I've not yet accomplished today. The white paper that I will send to you details the three things that the administration thinks the 20 million could be spent on. I will tell you candidly, I was not aware that you could accelerate the expenditure of the 200 million one-time money. So it did not occur to me that the 20 million that the governor has appropriated for broadband could get out the door sooner. If it can get out the door sooner, as I testified a moment ago, I think it should be on line extensions. I think it should be on the pre-construction and the planning activities that the CUDs say they need help with. And then we can get going on the revolving loan fund and grants that I was talking about. We will need some time to stand up this vehicle within the department. That would take a period of time, but we can get going on that if you can get that money out the door sooner. And I do apologize if I didn't make that clear earlier. I just didn't understand that you could accelerate the expenditure of the.
I want to be clear. We can try. We
Okay.
can't guarantee it. Senator Mitchell has written me, and I'm sure she's written Senator Cummings, come up with ideas you want to see spent in this second round. And
Yeah.
obviously, I think they're going to be constrained. They have to be defensible. I mean, they have to be defensible in the sense that it's better. We know we're going to spend we're likely to spend the money in the budget bill. And also that's one criteria. And two, it would be far better if we got it out the door 3 months earlier, like construction work or something like that.
Right. So
Yeah,
it's, again,
season and stuff.
Yeah.
So
understood. So again, to be clear, with the second bucket that I talked about in the white paper, the pre-construction costs, for instance, that CUDs encounter, they need to do detailed design planning, engineering planning. These things cost money. They need to be able to retain experts. They need to be able to retain lawyers, et cetera, in order to secure rights that they need to actually build projects, assuming they have design level plans. That's money that you could spend. The one-time money that I proposed from the $20 million, it is also something that you could fund by moving around some of this $3.2 million of CRF money. My preference would be that you do that with the one-time money and not the CRF dollars, because you run into all those limitations from the Treasury and the like, and the guidelines about what really qualifies as a CRF expenditure and what does not. And I think for the work that we're doing to support our CUDs, we don't want to have that cloud over it. We want to have clarity that the state of Vermont can spend this money in this fashion, and the CUDs can use it to get their development work done and the like that needs to get done if they're going to get moving on their mission. So I hope that's clear. What is not in the governor's proposal that was in the work that the programs you authorized last fall with CRF money is subsidies for broadband service. So that's an area where you could make a judgment call. My recommendation would be that you actually spend the CRF money that you allocated for that purpose now. The reason why I was referring you to the CUDs is that I'm not comfortable speaking for them in great detail as to what their needs are. I can put our CUD specialist, if you will, in front of you, and you can ask him if that would help you. I just didn't want to get out over my skis when it comes to
Yeah,
detailing
if-
what the CUDs need.
Thank you.
This is all hit very quickly. And I'm looking at tomorrow's agenda, but I believe tomorrow, yeah, we at 2:30, we have time blocked out for the committee because we're supposed to have this done by Tuesday. My concern is that in trying to get money out the door quickly, that's money we don't have to do something else with later. We know that the House has a major bill coming. The governor has a white paper proposal. Senator Brock has a proposal. And if we go through and allocate the one-time money, then we have less money to do other things with. So this is kind of like emergency. I was told we were supposed to look at 3.2, and the things have been the line extension and the subsidy for hookups, or maybe we could expand that to buying a modem, kind of thing. And then there is some money still there that if we can get somebody, the department's person for the CUDs in, maybe we could find out, because they're kind of a broad range of readiness, and we could get an update on how ready they are and who could use what money now. I don't think there's any reason why we can't do another bill on a more fast track if 3 or 4 weeks down the road after thought, we decide this is what we want to do, but I don't want to cut off our options too quickly. Senator Pearson.
Madam Chair, I think you're right. We clearly have to give a recommendation about the 3 point whatever million. But Senator Sorokin raises an interesting question, and there seems to me little doubt that by the end of session, we will put probably a significant amount of money towards broadband. So it seems to me we ought to have a conversation pretty quickly with folks in approps and just shave off. I mean, even shaving off 20% of what we guess is the final amount it sounds like would be a tremendous benefit to kickstarting some planning and really being able to better utilize that money faster. I mean, we are racing against the clock here, and that unfortunately it's not just time to plan, but also some investment to be able to plan. So I wonder if we would just consider that and just ask. I mean, for some portion, 20%, 30%, 40% of what we expect to get there, so that we're not taking away from other priorities that may emerge. But as you said, I don't know, it just makes sense to at least explore that, to me.
And I think it's our whole committee that's meeting with Peter Welch next week. It's all 4 money committees, so the goal is to find out what we can expect in federal aid, which, rumor keeps having it, we're going to get a whole lot of money. But you can't, it's not wise to spend what you don't have in the bank. But we could plan for if and when that money comes in. I mean, this is a very short term, but I think we can ask anything and see where it goes. So anybody else? Senator Brock, I thought I saw your hand.
Well, this is obviously we always love to have the ideal situation, and the ideal situation is we have a clear 10-year telecommunications plan completed that we can then execute the needs based on it. Now we're, of course, having to do this in reverse, and there's no good solution, let's face it. But what we have to do, I think, is we know that the ideal situation is to take 100-100 and extend it statewide in a logical manner. And that's the perfect solution. And we can't do the perfect solution, at least right now today. And so the question becomes, what can we do that's good, that's not perfect? I think the idea of continuing along with what we started last year, of doing the line extensions to those places that want them, that we haven't been able to fund, that to me is one of the first things. The second is we know that our CUDs are asking for funds to do things that will help them move along the projects that they have on the drawing board, and that will ultimately accelerate broadband expansion. Exactly what that'll look like, I'm not sure, but I think it is worth expending money to do that, to help the CUDs do the things that they already have on the drawing boards, or at least are placing on the drawing boards. And I think we should use the money, some of the money, to do that. We know that we've taken lines and we've moved them down roadways, and we have people who haven't been able to take it up. And they haven't been able to take it up, on the one hand, because of what they have to spend on a monthly basis. And the broadband subsidies, we know some of that is in the federal money. That's one thing. But what we also, I believe, know is that the issue of the equipment needed to be able to hook up has not been there. And we should use, I think, some of the money to do that. You know, the lines are already there. How do we hook it up to homes for people who need it? And we need to go out and we need to do some outreach in order to close that gap. And I'm not sure where the department is in being able to do that, but the information certainly is there to be able to do that. I think Senator Pearson's notion of trying to at least put a fence around the amount of money that we think we're going to need so that we do have it reserved, I think that's a good approach. The only question would be 2 to 3 to 4 weeks from now, are we going to be much further along to be able to put some meat on those bones? And I frankly, today, I don't know. I know that tomorrow morning, I have a meeting with Representative Brigglin from the House Energy and Technology Committee on their bill, and also the treasurer and also the head of VITA, talking about the potential financing arrangements that would be in the vehicle that I hope to bring to you. That includes the use of one-time money, both to set up reserves and to set up the base amount for revolving funds to be loaned against by CUDs and others going forward. That being a use of one-time money that would avoid bonding. And I hope at the end of that meeting, I'll have a little bit more information to share with the chair. The bill itself that we're working on is in draft, and I know Maria is working as fast as she can to do that, but that needs more stuff added to the bones there. It won't be there, it won't be ready in its entirety by Tuesday for us to discuss, but that notion of using the money for the kinds of things that we've talked about here today, that would be, I think we can spend the 3.2. I think we can also perhaps at least put a fence around a reservation of some other piece of the $20 million. And I think that we can accomplish by Tuesday.
Mm-hmm. Senator Sorokin.
I just want to ask Senator Brock, because that was very well said, and you listed some of your priorities here. I was wondering how you feel about the continuation of the subsidy program as something. It's been interrupted. We're partially restoring it for this couple of months until the feds come in, but even that restoration is at a lower income level. And so that's a need right now that it's, you know, if we decide we want to do that, it's not going to do us much good if we start paying people subsidies in August. And I'm wondering if that could be in your list of things that we might.
It might be. The subsidy thing, frankly, scares me. Because the risk that we always run with this is that we're going to give people money that they get used to for a period of time, and then the federal funds run out, and we still haven't answered the question, well, what are we going to do then? You
A
know,
lot of our,
are we in effect create a continuing program that we don't have the tax revenue to cover? And that's my biggest hesitancy there.
right, and that's a fair question. I think in most of the continuations that I've been involved in, it's been tied to COVID, and it's been tied to federal relief for a period of the extended pandemic and things like that. So that's also a way to approach it. But I hear you. I mean, even if you tied it to that, people will say, well, I need it afterwards as well. So
If it were a situation involving, let's say, CUDs, where you would expect additional people to add on as the network expands, and somehow you develop a lower cost model as a result. But I have heard nothing that leads me to believe that that's going to happen.
Yeah, maybe the CUDs will be there, but okay. So I'm going to ask Commissioner, I'm typing a note to Faith, seeing if we can get your CUD person in and see if anybody from the CUDs can come talk to us about. And I'm assuming that the CUDs that are probably most ready to go are EC Fiber and Central Vermont. At least when we left here, they were the only ones that were anywhere near close to stringing wire. But
I think that's exactly what's at issue is, are you going to accelerate the abilities of the other CUDs? And if you're going to, it would be because you gave them some of this money. And I just want to be clear, the subsidy and the LECAP are two existing programs that you already deemed to be worthy of funding using the money that is in the 3.2 million. If you do something more for the CUDs, you will need to decide how much you want to take away from either LECAP or the subsidies to give them that money. And I just want to make sure that was on your radar screen.
okay, Senator Hardy.
Thank you. So with all due respect, Commissioner, not necessarily, because what 1.4 million for LECAP, 1.4 million for subsidies. And I think we could, split the difference between the conversation with Senators Brock and Sorokin and have a subsidy program that might include subsidies
Yes.
for the equipment. And so that sort of gets at both of those issues and continues an already existing program.
Yes.
That gives us $400,000 that up to the 3.2. And as Senator Sorokin has very correctly pointed out, we also have the potential of using additional money. So if we can get a number for what the CUDs need, we could make the argument that we could use some 400,000 of CRF plus some of this one-time 200 million and at least start that along the way. So that would be my proposal pending what we hear tomorrow.
And we can talk with Mr. Fish in my office about that, but just a word of caution, the CUDs will take every dollar they can get. So they would take
yes.
the 3.2 million so you were asking if we can get a feel for it. What I'm saying is, at the end of the day, you will have to make a judgment that's independent of what the CUDs would tell you.
Absolutely. That's what we have to do with everybody, though.
There you go, including me. So.
Yes.
And us. Okay. Any other questions at this point? I've emailed Faith and asked her to see if she could get Mr. Fish and somebody from the CUDs to talk to us about what their needs are and see if we can focus this on what do you need in the next 2 or 3 months? And then just to be clear, we are making recommendations to appropriations. They are probably going to get other recommendations and they will decide, which is a little different than a bill. Once we have a bill, we have a little more, I think, integrity or power. We're not asking. We actually can do some appropriating there. So Senator Brock.
This is a question for Commissioner Tierney. I see that you've now awarded the contract for the telecom plan. Uh, The completion date for that is when, at this point, that you anticipate to get at least a draft,
You mean an interim draft or the final draft?
interim draft?
Clay, what is the first deliverable under the contract?
I believe it's May 10th.
Thank you.
Okay.
The interim draft, the final draft, as I recall, is due June 1, and adoption is June 30.
And, obviously that is not helpful for our immediate need in terms of being able to address it. That said, the contract that was let for the amount seemed to be lower than the amount that we had been thinking about based on the proposals that you got last year. Do you believe that the contract at the rate that it's been executed is sufficient to give us the kind of plan that we want? Or should some of the funds that we have be devoted to doing a more expansive contract for a plan?
Senator, I met with the contractors yesterday, and I am persuaded that they're going to give us a top shelf product. And it has the advantage of building on the work that's already been done, though that work was done for a very different purpose. So if you want to authorize more money and that money is available, and we want to pursue yet another iteration of the plan using a different contractor with a greater scope and so forth, you can spend about as much money as you want to on telecom planning. But I think that we've right-sized it for Vermont. We've spent 500,000, I think, give or take, on the emergency plan. A lot of that is a foundation that serves also in this in the 10-year plan. But I think the contractors are headed in just the right direction to give us the plan that we need. And I don't feel the need to spend more money on this.
I think at that, it's after 5. I think it's time we all took a break. Some of us will get a break, some of us not. But I will see everybody back here tomorrow. We'll do our best to get the CUDs in, and then we can start to think about finalizing. I don't know if we don't make the Tuesday deadline, if we lose. I don't think so. But we should be finalizing and kind of looking at what we can do. So thank you, Commissioner and Clay, and thank you, committee. It's been a long day.